In the mid-1800s, the first mass migrations to the west coast of North America were driven by large gold finds, first in California and then in the Rocky Mountains. Starting from the late 1850s, more than 30,000 people moved to future Colorado in about 2 years, and by 1871 the now 10-year-old territory had grown to about 200,000. Thus began the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, named after a mountain that was about 70 miles south of the first finds, but did happen to be famous from earlier descriptions by Army officer and explorer Zebulon Pike. The Ute tribes of the region called the mountain Tabakwash, in reference to how the unusually prominent peak captured the sun. But European explorers gave it several other names until Pikes Peak finally stuck for good. The city of Colorado Springs traces to the 1859 founding of Old Colorado City at the base of Pikes Peak by William Jackson Palmer, a successful railroad baron. The city grew steadily until the 1890s, when some of the richest gold and silver discoveries in all of Colorado were found southwest of Pikes Peak, then grew rapidly as supplies and ore began flowing through the city's commercial and industrial centers. The Second World War ended most of Colorado's gold mining, while investments by the U.S. government in Army and Air Force installations progressively pushed the region's major industries toward defense contracting and high tech. In the 1960s and 1970s, many Colorado residents noticed that the legacy of the mineral industry was variously disappearing to weather, vandalism, and new development, and represented a history worth preserving. In 1970, the Museum of the West was incorporated with artifacts from the Farrar family. Today, the Western Museum of Mining and Industry occupies a 27-acre historic homestead in North Colorado Springs and is open to the public. The museum's outdoor areas feature an impressive collection of large equipment. Some items here, including the towering Cornish walking beam engine sitting prominently on a brick pedestal to the west side of the main drive, are also relevant to specific displays inside the facility. A common theme for some of the larger pieces is steam power. At the beginning of the gold rush, the majority of sites started with hand labor and candles, then upgraded to steam power and carbide lanterns when they could afford it. Some areas grew fast enough to justify electric infrastructure at a fairly early date, but boilers and steam engines were the rule for a majority of operations prior to the early 1900s. However, most of the outdoor equipment is just for display. Inside, things get a bit more interesting. The museum building is divided into 3 main sections, 2 of which are included with the admission fee and tour. The central area near the admissions desk features large steam machines and related exhibits. A library and conference area for museum members is located to the south. and the extensive north wing traces the full cycle of late 19th and early 20th century mining with exhibits, models, and artifacts. The day of our visit, museum docent Judy was leading the 1 o'clock tour.
All of those colored spots on there are mining claims. And in fact, they're multiple mining claims. And I just like that map because to me it represents all the work somebody did to keep those in the family. Look at this rock right here. I look at that rock and say, there's no way I'd pick that up and go, woohoo, eureka, I found gold. But it's actually a pretty good specimen of gold work. So they really have to learn something.
With enough time, any amount of water will eventually move a mountain. The earliest discoveries of gold were correspondingly panned from waterways downstream of an original source.
So you'd find your spot, you'd stake it, and you'd go to work. Well, oftentimes they were using their plates, their metal plates that they brought with them to do that. And so they'd scoop up the sand, add water to it. Gold is 19 times heavier than water. You're going to swirl it around, it sinks to the bottom. Every time you swirl it, you take off dirt and the rest of it, and hopefully you're left with little pieces of gold left in your pan.
To filter the gold-bearing placer deposits more quickly than in nature, early miners variously resorted to hydraulic mining, in which a fire hose was turned against a sedimentary hillside, and dredging. A dredge was a kind of large-scale automatic gold panning operation built into a barge, as demonstrated with functional elements by this detailed model. However, hydraulic mining and dredging caused extensive environmental damage both at the site of recovery and in the downstream flow. In time, both methods were regulated to extinction, and only a few tightly controlled dredging operations continue anywhere in North America today. England's Cornwall region was mined as far back as the Bronze Age. Cornish tradesmen were variously skilled in all areas of the mining industry and were highly sought after in U.S. operations. In addition to showing the general structure of a hard rock mining operation and a shaft hoist, this model also includes a distinctly Cornish innovation, the walking beam engine, used here to pump out the water which otherwise tended to flood the underground operations over time.
They said, okay, we're going to find a vein here, so they sunk a shaft until they found that vein. And when they found the vein, they followed it, and they followed it up. And they said that was easier to do because they could use gravity to send it down those chutes down to the mine car to be taken up out of the mine. So it was a huge improvement over steam. Steam was the first thing that they used to run engines, but when they realized that compressed air would do the same thing. But this was a very efficient air compressor. Now, this whole system was used in any factory in Europe and America back in the day. So what you had is you had an engine, usually steam. We have an electric engine, but it's usually steam. And what it does is it turns a wheel down at the bottom here. You add a belt to that wheel, and you take it up to the drive shaft. The drive shaft will go all the way through your factory or your mill, whatever you're working on. And it's going to run that wheel or that axle. And any other machine you want to run, you just add a wheel, a belt, and it will run this one too. After 100 years, it still works. We don't like it. And if you're going to work that day, your reminder, you do ride the bucket. I think it sounds like a lot of fun. So you could get in, one miner fit pretty comfortably. Two miners, not too comfortably, but it was still too slow to get everybody to work one at a time or two at a time. So they fit four. They'd all stand on the rim. What it brings up is whoever's running this hoist machine literally had lives in his hands, because he just has a brake and a hoist lever up. So he really had to know what he was doing. If he got going too fast, it could rock, people fall off. If he forgot where the bottom was, slam on, it's like falling off of a 10-story building.
So that chain would extend all the way down the shaft? Mm-hmm. So whoever needed to move the bucket, they'd send the signal.
They would send a signal. He would hear it, send the bucket to that area. And then that was actually a thing. All right. Yeah, there's stove over there, but the much easier one was the face. So you have a flat tunnel with a face at the end of that tunnel, and you're continuing that tunnel. This is made of silicon. So silicon is what we make glass out of. So it's like little sharp shards of glass in their lungs, and it would eventually cut up their lungs and cause death. It's called silicosis, terrible disease.
Silicosis, a hardening of the lungs caused by breathing mineral dust, was a common problem in the mining industry until the turn of the 20th century, when a Colorado machine vendor named J. George Lehner first started selling rock drills with a water injection port. But many other hazards of the industry continued for decades. Explosives, rock dust, bad air, fumes from carbide lamps, a lack of general protective equipment, a total absence of machine guards or fall protection, and other risks of this kind were typical for the profession. In these early days, the crass reality was that equipment was a major investment, an animal was priceless, but a man could be easily replaced.
Did that produce an odor when it burned?
Oh yeah, it's a very distinctive odor. And I tell you, when I smell it, it takes me back to being about 8 years old. They use this for 100 years in mining, and it's still used today. They mainly because it's cheap, gave you a good flame. You could always take extra, that's a container of calcium carbide, so you didn't have to run out. And what it does is when it's done, it's just like a little bit of snow. You just pour it out and you replenish it all. So before dynamite was invented, they did have some pretty good explosives. They had nitroglycerin, they had black powder that fumigated mercury. They worked really well, but they were unstable, meaning that if you dropped it, you'd either be killed or seriously injured. And everything was made back east for Colorado, and they'd have to ship it out to Colorado. And you can imagine you put a whole train of nitroglycerin that hits a buffalo in the plains of Nebraska, and it's all gone. Alfred Nobel, when he came along, he said, let's see if we can make it stable so it's not as dangerous. So he worked for many years with all the different explosives and the different compounds, and when he came up with something stable, he wrapped red wax paper around it and called it dynamite. Literally revolutionized the world. In fact, did you guys know that dynamite is so stable that you can put it into a
Miners were famous for being superstitious, but no miner would know for sure how good or bad his luck had been until he spent time in the assaying office. Early assaying offices worked with small-scale laboratory tools and small quantities of ore, which meant a dishonest mine operator could spray a handful of gold or silver dust across a protruding vein surface and then convince a gullible investor or contract operator to buy into the mine when an assay of the resulting sample showed good results. To keep more people honest, the assaying offices quickly evolved into miniature mill operations, capable of crushing and smelting random samples from much larger ore lots. A sampling mill might be part of a mill operation, or it might be an independent office. Since trust was a constant problem wherever gold was involved, some sampling mills would employ assayers from competing businesses, such as a mill operator and a purchasing smelter, and each assayer would independently run the same tests on one half of each sample lot.
So this is a model of a stamp mill. We have a full-size stamp mill on the property. It runs. It's only one of two in America that run. They started on special days in the summertime, family days and stuff. It takes about 6 people. What you have is you take your big rocks, you put it into that red machine, which is a rock crusher. That rock crusher crushes it to about walnut size. Comes down a chute down to this level. This man over here is shoveling it into the stamp. The stamps are being lifted by the machine that's over there. The engine over there is lifting it and then dropping it. And this is a stamp here from a stamp mill. This one weighs about 150 pounds. Some of them could weigh up to 600 pounds. Crushes those rocks into a powder. So they found that gold will mix with mercury. It'll mix with that and form an amalgam. So the man here would take that mercury, spread it on the bottom of there with his hand, and it would go over that. It would grab all to the gold and form an amalgam. And everything else is washed away. And at the end of the day, he would scoop up all that amalgam. He would take it to a kiln, big oven like that, heat it to a very high point so that the mercury evaporates off, and he's finally left with your gold, silver, and copper. I'll show you what it does. I don't know who built these models, but they're really cool.
Lurking within the clatter of the model is a rhythmic cadence that can also be heard in real stamp mills. It results from variations in the stamp wear, cam adjustments, and the way each stamp's position in the row changes how the impact resonates through the structure. Another factor is the firing order. One concern was not to create excessive vibrations in the rotating assembly. Another was that the stamps ground ore in a wet pan, converting it to slurry, and a consistent wash pattern was desired so that the tray would self-flush. One manufacturer's pattern that appears in old mining resources is 1-3-5-2-4, which always skips at least one stamp. This model is using a different pattern which runs 1-4-2-3-5 as viewed from left to right on the front side.
So are you from around here? I was wondering if you've been
My
up
wife,
to
my wife and I are up in Golden.
Oh, yeah, we're
Yeah.
just north Fort Collins. So you've seen the Denver one.
Yeah.
This is quite nice.
Well, the Denver one probably hasn't been updated in 50 years. This here might actually be a bigger collection of fluorescent minerals than what Denver Museum has,
Wow.
from what I can tell.
I haven't been in the Denver one forever. I need to go see that now. Oh, this is amazing. If you want, you can turn the light back on.
Adjacent to the museum's largest rock sample displays is this unique exhibit reflecting the much greater value that is placed on miners' lives today. In Chile, in 2010, the Copiapó mining accident occurred and 33 souls were trapped 2,300 feet underground. A modern mine design with an equipped rescue room, heroic drilling efforts from the surface, and a bespoke rescue pod, inspired by both aerospace and submarine technologies, eventually saved all of them. Neat.
So you needed a couple things with steam. You needed a boiler, of course, to make your steam. So you'd build a fire in the bottom there, fill that with water, and boil your water to produce your steam. Once it would go through those coils, it become very, very small. It would come over and you could run an engine and then do whatever you're doing. The machine is built by the Orr and Sembauer Corporation. It's a dual piston system. And it was fairly small because it could produce 10 horsepower of work. It's hooked up over here to an Edison dynamo built by Thomas Edison in 1881. It's the oldest machine in stock today. Yeah, it kind of might start a little loud. Automatically piped or pumped the oil through the machine. So huge invention. This one's a single piston engine. It's bigger, more powerful. It could produce 67 horsepower of work. It's hooked up in the front here to a Westinghouse dynamo that could make 50,000 watts of electricity. This one was ran a mine mill in Tuala, Utah for many years. They brought it here, cleaned up, and this one has one piston, so it kind of has that one piston rocking motion. I have to try really hard not to rock with it. A weighted flywheel, which means I have to stop it in the right place. Because it's weighted on one side, as it stops in the wrong place, it doesn't have enough to get it going up.
So is the piston going lengthwise this way?
Yeah, it's inside the housing there, going back and forth like that.
This one could take out about 8,000 gallons of power, so it was pretty powerful. It pumped out of mine up in Walden, Colorado, which is in the northwest part of the state. When they found it in that well house. There's a picture of the well house in the back there. They found it in there, they brought it here. They cleaned it all up, and all of that paint and decoration is original. So it was kind of fun that they made it kind of fancy looking. That mining was loud. Yeah. This one was built in 1895. It has two pistons, which are really unique, and what's unique about it is that the key uses steam twice. So the steam would push the high pressure on the back there, come around and push the low pressure. So it's very efficient that way. This one is 500 horsepower work. And it was sold to a paper mill factory in Massachusetts in 1910. It ran in that factory, did everything in that factory until 1970. The machine altogether weighs 70,000 pounds. They sent it out, they sent a team out, they took it apart, labeled it all. I think they had to use big cranes to move it, put it onto the flatbed, shipped it out to Colorado Springs, they brought it out here, set it all up, and then they built the building around it. It did everything in that factory for 60 years. We run it in the museum at 10 revolutions per minute. In the factory, it ran at 100 revolutions per minute. So we only do like 10%. Assay office to crush up those.
We completed our visit in late afternoon light, just as museum staffers were preparing to close the facility for the day. We were satisfied that our entrance fees had been more than compensated by the day's exhibits and equipment startups. Although not available today, a future visit in the summer could include some combination of the historic stamp mill, hoist house, blacksmith shop, and other external demonstrations that would be open on a special exhibit day. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us again on my YouTube channel. This has been another episode of HMGM, How to Model a Gold Mill in 27,000 Easy Steps. Hope you enjoyed that tour of the Western Museum of Mining and Industry. In spite of all the material we were able to see and kind of preview here in this episode, we covered maybe half of everything that was there and really only looked at a third or less of the exhibits in detail, so there's a lot more to see in a future visit, which we hope to do. But you probably realize that in light of our series and the model that we're building, what really attracted us to this facility was the working models they had. Lots of moving parts built at scale with a lot of attention to detail. Obviously, our model is not going to have moving parts. We are modeling a facility in its abandoned state, but we are going for the same level of detail and realism. So really inspiring to see something like that. If you have the opportunity to get to Colorado Springs, I'd highly recommend it. And in the meantime, thank you for joining us again today, and we'll see you again on a future episode whenever we get around to making one. Has anyone seen my phone?